Welcome back to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Thanks for joining us once again as we have stirring conversation and fun together.
I had a nice day today. I took our youngest out to do a little bit of shopping, and then we grabbed a coffee. She had a lemon meringue pastry of some kind, which of course she couldn't finish, but it was delicious, so I helped her.
I'm sure. That was not an issue.
Yeah, it was really nice, actually. She calls them mummy days because we used to have mummy days when she was little and didn't go to school. So she misses that, and I do too, actually.
Yeah, life just keeps rolling on, unfortunately. And you kind of lose those moments when you're in them. You're like, will this ever end? Those days,
and then it does.
Those days on the playground forever, and then they're gone.
Yeah,
we haven't been to a playground in years.
Yeah, we used to spend nearly all our time there.
Yeah, haven't had to push anybody on a swing or help them stop crying, any of that. It's great.
Yeah, well, this week I wanted to follow up from what we were discussing last week. We were talking about church leadership, and one of the things that sort of came out of that is a discussion about integrity.
A little bit, yeah. We brought up integrity, and I think it's a word that is thrown around quite a bit, but not everybody understands what integrity really means and how to apply it in life. And when you look around, even this week, you and I were reading an article that came out where in Texas, 3 megachurch pastors in the stretch of like 2 weeks, these are guys who've been in these roles for 40 years or 20 years for a long, long, long time, built these mega churches, all fell. They all had to resign or step away because they had a moment where they lacked integrity, and it's come back to bite them.
And it's been happening a lot in the last couple of years and this is why we sort of brought up the discussion of church leadership first, to talk about what leadership looked like in the early church and the way that we're doing it differently now. And one of the consequences of the change that we have made to the way we do leadership is this idea that someone's up on this pedestal, they're perfect, they're charismatic, everybody looks up to them and admires them and hangs on every word that comes out of their mouth. I mean, some of these guys, they're really charismatic, they have large followings, and people just think that everything they say is gold. And when they fall and when they have these moral failures, it really impacts their congregation, but it also has wider reaching implications for the Christian community and for non-Christians who look and see this happening.
Yeah, I mean, the people who are not believers, they look in and go, see, I knew you guys weren't actually being honest. I knew you guys weren't all that you make out yourselves to be. You're just like me.
Yeah.
And so why would I bother?
And so one of the things that we want to talk about today is about integrity. And integrity is so important when you want to be in ministry or in leadership or even just living your life as a Christian. I think that a lot of times people don't really know how to have integrity or what it is. And I was thinking about it this morning on my walk and thinking about, talking to my kids about integrity. And I thought, you know what, we should talk about it on the podcast too.
Yeah, well, even as a baseball coach, I've talked to my players about integrity, because integrity plays a role in sports of doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it with your full passion and ability. And, it can bring down a baseball team if you've got a player who's not playing with integrity, who's, I don't mean necessarily cheating, but if they're not actually giving it their all, that's going to be, I can promise you, that's where the ball's going to be hit, and they're not going to be prepared, and that's where the runs get scored, and that's how you lose a game, is if you don't have integrity as a player. Now, that's something simple, but it does, as you say, it applies whether you're a Christian or not. If you're a businessman, if you don't have integrity, it's not long before people don't want to do business with you because they know you're going to mess them up, or it's not going to be fair.
And you might get away with it for a while, but you won't get away with it forever. And there will be people who discover what's going on. I mean, I hate to even bring it up, but, Ravi Zacharias, one example, he spent his life doing ministry and nobody really knew what was going on, or at least it certainly didn't come out publicly until after his death. And the things that he was involved with, it was just really disappointing to a lot of people. And if you'd had him on a pedestal and were thinking that he was the best thing since sliced bread and what an amazing Christian man and all this sort of stuff, that would have been a really difficult thing to process and work through. And there's countless examples of this where what we teach our kids is integrity means doing the right thing even when no one is watching.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real common definition. I went to the dictionary and got the official definition for integrity. And I love it because there's actually three aspects of integrity. Like, one is talking about the moral aspect of integrity, but we also talk about like the integrity of a bridge. Is it strong enough to hold me up if I'm walk across it, that kind of thing. So there's a few different definitions of integrity. The one we're majoring on today, obviously, is the moral side of it. The dictionary defines integrity as the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Now, the second one, which I actually think is even more important and applicable, even though it's mentioning something else, it says the state of being whole and undivided. So that's talking about integrity like of a bridge or whatever. But I think it's actually more applicable to us because the Bible talks a lot about not being double-minded. When we're double-minded, you can't have integrity because you're not picking a side.
And not having a divided heart.
Yeah. And so I think that one actually makes more sense of being whole and undivided.
That is really good because, the Bible tells us that you can't serve God and money.
Yeah.
You can't
That's one example. Yeah.
You can't serve God and the enemy. You shouldn't be double-minded. You shouldn't be divided. A house divided cannot stand. That's another verse. We should have our devotion and attention fixed on God. When we allow ourselves to be divided and focus and idolize money or fame or fortune or whatever other thing is sort of dragging our attention away from God, that's where you start to have lack of integrity, or if you look, talking about the bridge metaphor again, the foundations start to crumble.
Yeah. And yes, I mean, integrity is being honest, and it is having high moral character and principles and doing what you say. You can give 1,000 examples of what integrity looks like, but the application of it is really hard. An example I've given before is if you believe that stealing is wrong, you won't steal. Now, people will go, well, what if you're hungry and starving? What about then? Does stealing become okay? If you're going to steal it for the right reasons because you're starving and you want to feed your family? Well, I would say integrity would say no, because it's still stealing. You're still doing the wrong thing even for the right reason.
I know a lot of people would struggle with that, but
certainly
we would always bring it back to, are you trusting God for your provision or not?
Yeah. And so as Christians, that would be my argument, is God's promised to meet our needs and provide for our needs. So if we take that role out of God's hands and take it upon ourselves to meet our needs, then our belief is actually not that stealing's wrong. We have a situational belief going, stealing's wrong sometimes. Not always. I remember even in university, I had to take a philosophy class as part of my degree, just a one-off kind of philosophy class. It was basic philosophy. And I had to write a paper and you had to pick a theme. And my theme was on, is there situational truth or is there absolute truth? And of course, I took up the thing saying, I believe is absolute truth, that there are things that they are always true, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstances, because of my Christian faith and background. And I argued that because in philosophy, there's a lot of places where there's situational truth. And so much of our culture now today has a situational truth.
For sure.
Where they go, what's good for me is good for me. May not be good for you, but it's good for me.
Yeah, it's my truth. It's my experience. Yeah. And I think also there's this tendency in the modern world, and it's in our culture and it seeps into the church, to say, oh, well, it's not so bad. And, you were hungry, so stealing, it's out of compassion, but it's misplaced compassion because, as we say, you're not trusting God and it is doing the wrong thing.
Well, it becomes divided, right? I'm doing the wrong thing for the right reason. That's divided.
Yeah.
That's not whole.
And when you look at it from a spiritual perspective, you give the enemy a foothold when you sin. So what happens when these leaders have these massive falls? It didn't start out with them doing something big. It didn't start out with them, diving straight off the cliff into a big puddle of sin. It starts with something small that's not a big deal. They maybe just sent a text message that was a little bit flirty or something like that they shouldn't have done. And that's how it begins, and you give the enemy a foothold.
So I think we're really good at rationalizing things. We make an excuse for bad behavior. I need this right now, or it's just this one time, or whatever it may be.
It's not a big deal. It didn't hurt anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where integrity is lacking.
Yeah.
But see, God, he blesses integrity. Like going back to the example of stealing food, and yes, do I believe God's going to provide for my needs, even though I'm sitting here starving and I don't have any money and I could take that piece of bread without anybody knowing? Do I still trust God to meet my needs, even though that's there? But God does. And I have a bunch of verses on integrity. First one is 1 Chronicles 29:17. It says, I know, my God, that you test the heart and are pleased with integrity. Psalm 41:11-12 says, I know that you are pleased with me, for my enemy does not triumph over me. Because of my integrity, you uphold me and set me in your presence forever. Now, that almost has a little bit of a transactional promise to it. Because of my integrity, you uphold me, right? So when I'm doing the right thing, God blesses that. God protects me. God upholds me. Proverbs 10:9, it says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. And that's the thing that we always forget, is when we choose those other things, as I was saying, when we rationalize things and we choose that other thing, we think nobody's ever going to know.
Yeah, exactly.
But the Bible also says your sins will find you out. Like it does come out. And the example of these pastors in Texas, none of what they're resigning for happened yesterday. Some of it was over 30 years ago, but it's coming out now.
Yeah. And they would have thought nobody is ever going to find out. And the thing is, maybe they wouldn't while that person's still alive, but maybe they will. And that's not actually the issue anyway, because God knows.
And talking about integrity being something that's whole and undivided, this is Proverbs 11:3. I love this. It says, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. So integrity is a pretty important thing, I think, between us and God. Yeah. Not just in life and doing the right thing and being honest and all of that. It actually has implications for our life, whether we're going to be in God's favor, whether we're going to prosper. I think doing the right thing always leads, maybe not immediately, but always leads actually to good stuff. It actually prospers us in the long run.
Yeah, and in Proverbs 5, it talks about being tempted and what happens. And verse 9, it says, in disgrace you will relinquish your honor to another, and all your remaining years will be squandered, given over to the cruel one. And then in 11 it says, for when you grow old, you will groan in anguish and shame. Then you finally will admit that you were wrong and say, if only I'd listened to wisdom's voice. And it ends with verse 14, now I'm totally disgraced and my life is ruined. I'm paying the price for the people of the congregation and now my judges.
Yeah.
That's the Passion Translation.
That's a pretty sad one, scary one right there.
And that's what happens. I mean, we see this time and time again, that this is what happens.
And look, I mean, we're not trying to make anybody feel bad. We all make mistakes. We all have made mistakes, particularly in our younger years. We make really bad decisions sometimes and they come back to get us. But I think if we try and live a life of integrity where our word is our bond, our actions are faithful, then there's a lot less opportunity for those things to have consequences in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, make decisions like God is watching, because he's there. And I've got an example from our own lives from many years ago when we were young.
Yeah.
We lived in the United States and I was working for the Australian government in Atlanta. And as part of that, I didn't pay tax to the US government because foreign governments don't pay tax to other governments. And So the idea was, I was a US citizen or resident and then citizen, I don't remember which at the time. Part of that was that, so I would pay tax, but it wasn't paid by my employer. I had to pay it myself. And we went and found an accountant, and the accountant went through all of our taxes. And this is at a time when we did not have very much money. We had a lot of debt to pay off from our college years. We were just basically living on fumes. Like, we really did not have much money. You were a pastor just starting out. I was working at the consulate. We had very little money, and so money was tight, and we were just struggling to get by. And I went to the accountant, and she said, you have to file as self-employed, and this means you have to pay a self-employment tax. And this was quite a substantial tax on top of the normal amount of income tax.
Yeah.
And that was going to be thousands of extra dollars that we were going to have to pay. And I was very upset because I don't like spending money and I don't like tax. And it was going to be hard for us to pay that money. The whole time, so I worked there for 4 years, the whole time I was going to have to do this. And I had this moment of decision where I was like, I don't want to do this. And all of the people I worked with at the office, they didn't pay tax because they said, well, the Australian government doesn't report your income to the US. They don't know how much money you're making, so you don't have to pay tax. And so none of them paid tax. And they said to me, don't pay. You know, no one will ever know. No one will ever find out. They don't report it. But I said, no, I'm going to pay, and I'm going to pay even extra because it's the right thing to do. Because I was taught growing up that you have integrity and you do the right thing even if it hurts and even if nobody will find out and nobody's watching. And it really did hurt. Let me just say, it really hurt. Thousands of dollars. And so we did. For that whole 4 years, we paid extra tax. We paid income tax, and then we paid self-employment tax on top of it. And it was a lot of money. And I just kind of put it behind me and forgot about it and just got on with it and didn't worry anymore about it. Until finally we left and came back to Australia. And about that time, the US government announced that they were going to do an audit of all foreign government employees. And if you hadn't been paying tax, you were going to be in big trouble and you were going to have to pay all of your back taxes.
Probably with interest.
Yeah. And they wanted every single one of us to submit all of our tax returns for the whole years, whatever years we had worked for the foreign government. So I did. I had to resubmit and pay an extra fee to again do tax returns for all of those years. And we got a massive refund.
Yeah.
We got all of the self-employment tax back because we weren't really supposed to pay that because I wasn't self-employed. And that helped put a deposit on our house.
Yeah. I mean, there you go. God blesses it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other one was when we moved into this house, there were these trees on our borderline, and they were very obnoxious trees, and they dropped leaves and flowers and seeds at 3 different times of the year and basically made this huge mess all the time. But they were part of the DA for the property that they were on, and they had to be there, and you couldn't cut them down, and you couldn't deal with them, and all this sort of stuff. And
the council would not help us.
Council was not interested in hearing our complaints, and everybody on our street was really annoyed with it.
Yeah, I mean, they were really close to our house. They were massive, and they hung right over the house, and we were concerned that the roots were digging into the foundation and all that sort of stuff.
Lots of problems with them. And at times I went, I'm just going to go and put a copper nail in these things and kill them. And I mean, many times, like when I'm back there cleaning out the gutters, it was one of those moments where I want to kill these trees. You know?
And then they told us we had to pay for a professional arborist to trim the trees, which cost a fortune. Yeah. We were like, oh my gosh, we cannot keep doing this.
Lots of problems. Long story short, I decided, no, I'm not going to do the wrong thing. And we waited. And what happened was the developer on that land didn't know that we actually had access to sewage on our property.
Our
stormwater drain, that's what it was. And he was having some issues with drainage and all of this. And once he found out that we had that on our property, he came looking for access to it. So he had to have my permission. And I very gladly said, you are more than welcome to tie into it if you get rid of these trees. And I was able to do that. And he agreed to it, and he got rid of those trees. And to this day, I don't have to clean the gutters every 3 days because they're all gone.
That was beautiful.
But some other people had other ideas about that, and they got threatened by the council because to mess with these trees was like a $40,000 fine for each one of them. Yeah. Thankfully, no one got charged with that stuff, but I could have done the wrong thing to solve my problem, but I just kept feeling like God had a different plan for it. Now that didn't happen. I mean, we had
this was years. Yeah.
For like 10 years we had to deal with this, but then God provided that. And it worked out for everyone.
At no expense to us.
That's right. We didn't have to pay for it or anything. And now we have lovely little lily pillies, I think they're called.
Yeah, lily pillies.
So that don't drop leaves in my yard and in my gutters and all that. So deciding to do the right thing often has a consequence, because for all those years I had to do the gutters and raking, and our backyard just looked horrible because there was always something falling on it in great quantities. But once I waited on God and let him solve it, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
and there's not always going to be that payback like when we got the tax refund. We weren't expecting that. We didn't know that was going to happen. And when you do the right thing, sometimes the consequences are going to sting and they won't necessarily be turned around for you. But it is worth it because having integrity matters. It matters in the kingdom. It matters in the spiritual realm. And as I've said, when you give the enemy a foothold, he then has access and authority in your life, and it is a slippery slope.
It is. And when you do something wrong and you get away with it, it's often easier to do the wrong thing again next time. Yeah. And to build on it until the consequence gets you.
Yeah. One of the things I also thought would be good to bring up when it comes to integrity, because we're talking about integrity, like how do people manage this? How do they, maybe no one's ever said to people listening before that you need to have integrity even when no one's watching. One of the things that I find to be useful in building a life of integrity is to be open and honest with people in your life. So you don't have to share everything with everyone. Don't overshare, but have people in your life that you're accountable to. Like if you struggle with addiction, or you struggle with pornography, or you struggle with chasing after money and really always trying to do the wrong thing because you want to get more money, have people in your life that you talk to about that and are open with. I think a lot of these leaders, they try to portray this perfection, this image of perfection. I'm so good. I'm so perfect. I can't possibly show any weakness. I mean, if they do reveal weakness, sometimes it means their career. Sometimes it means their job and their livelihood. And so I think we need to normalize being more vulnerable with each other and more open about the things we struggle with.
Well, I think, just destigmatizing the fact that we all have issues.
Yeah, even Paul said that he had a thorn in his side.
Yeah, I think we really need to destigmatize the fact that we all have issues. We all have sins. We all have problems. No one is perfect. The Bible says there's none righteous, no, not one. And so if we look at somebody, if it's the pastor or the worship leader or your home group leader, whatever it may be, and we go, oh, their life is just so wonderful and they're so perfect. Well, look, because of being a pastor and sitting with people and hearing all the skeletons in their closet, I can tell you right now, there is nobody who has it all together.
No, nobody's perfect.
And in fact, the people that you think you see them dressed really well, driving the Mercedes, and they smile and they're put together, many times they're the people who have the most issues going on. It's just they hide it better than others.
And if you want to have a life of true integrity and fellowship with God, and a ministry where you reach others and all that sort of thing, choose to be vulnerable and open. You and I, when we share with our friends and people in our small group and all that sort of stuff, we have a close circle of people that we share things with. We tend to be vulnerable. We don't overshare and just blurt everything out, but we tend to be vulnerable. I will share the things that I've done wrong and, or the things that don't make me look that great with those people, because I don't want them to put me on any kind of pedestal and be like, oh, you just have it all together. I don't want to be that person wearing the mask all the time. It's exhausting.
Yeah, and that's hard for both of us. You are very private as a person and don't like sharing intimate details of your life or the things you struggle with. Like, that's a really hard thing for you. So I know it has to be an intentional thing. I'm exactly the same way. I'm terrible with vulnerability, but I've made a choice in certain environments and with certain people to be vulnerable, to sort of say, guess what? I don't have it all together. And even here on the podcast in recent weeks, I've talked about, I've struggled recently. I've had a hard time. Me and God aren't always on the same page right now. I've done that intentionally to basically show I'm a normal person.
Yeah.
Not that any of you are probably listening think I'm perfect or great or anything like that. I don't think anybody's putting me on a pedestal. But before you do, I just want you to know I'm not perfect. And I do struggle, and I'm just like the next person. Sometimes I stump my toe and say a cuss word. Like I'm not perfect.
Yeah. And I think it's just really important, if you want to be involved in ministry and if you're living a life as a Christian, it's important to have that vulnerability and openness with some people, not with everyone. Share the things that you struggle with. Be accountable. We say accountability a lot. I don't really like that term so much. It's more, to me, it's more just about, hey, bring it out of the darkness into the light.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just a term that we use, but I think it's important. I think it's in James, and it just says, confess your sins to one another so that people can pray for you and you will be healed.
Yes, exactly.
If you don't confess, though, you can't get healed.
Exactly. And this is what's happening. This is why these leaders are having these big falls from grace, is because they're not sharing that I'm really struggling with this, or I messed up last night and I did such and such. Can you pray for me? And they're not letting the elders or the people around them that are supposed to be guiding, shepherding, correcting, praying for them. They're not letting them know about their flaws and failures. And so what you leave in the darkness will fester and grow. But what you bring into the light will be healed. That's
it. And I think we need to change our view of what makes us righteous. I mean, being good all the time doesn't make us righteous. I heard a guy on TikTok the other day. He's a really fantastic preacher on TikTok, and he was just talking about doing things to please God versus obeying God. And he says they're two different things. One, you cannot do anything that pleases God. In fact, you've already pleased God in your decision to follow Christ and give your life to him. That's what makes you pleasing to God, is it's the sacrifice of Jesus. Yeah. And when you stand before God, he looks at you through Jesus. So he sees Jesus in you, and that's what pleases him. It's not the good things that you do or the avoiding bad things that you don't do. And it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible tells us that our righteousness is as filthy rags. I mean, I've always thought that was pretty harsh, but really, if you look at it from a different perspective, it lets us off the hook for having that expectation of ourselves to be righteous. God is pleased, as you say, with our faith, with us having faith in him and choosing him. Our righteousness, the good things that we do, will never measure up.
Yeah. And I think we also have to stop judging other people.
Big one.
And whether it's judging them as I say, they look like they have it all together and you think everything's great, that's a judgment. The same as, look at that dude, he's got green hair and earrings and tattoos, he must be bad, or his life must be something else.
Or if they do mess up and do something and then you just judge them and you don't want anything more to do with them, kick them out of the church, don't give them any kind of restoration, that sort of thing as well. That's not helpful. This is why people keep things in the darkness and don't bring them to the light and aren't vulnerable, is because they know, if I share this, my whole life is going to be destroyed because people are going to kick me out of my church. I won't be able to be involved in the ministries I'm in anymore. My friends won't want to talk to me. That sort of punishment that we do and judgment, that's not our place. It's not our place to judge and punish people.
No.
We need to love one another. That doesn't mean we leave people in positions of leadership who have done really bad things. Of course not. Of course not. But we still love them. They are still Christians that are a part of our family. Now, if they keep living in that sin after we've talked to them about it as a church and that sort of thing, Paul has things that he says to address that about, go to them.
Well, that's Matthew.
Oh, Matthew. But it's in the Bible.
Yes, it is.
Bible. How are we supposed to address ongoing sin? There are ways to manage that and so on. But, I mean, we're not really talking about that today. What we're talking about is, how do you keep your heart pure? How do you make decisions of integrity in your life? If maybe no one has ever modeled that to you before. I remember a story my dad told me when I was young, that he made a good bit of money when I was pretty little, and he had an accountant who got a bunch of them to invest money in something, and Dad didn't really know what it was being invested into, but he just trusted this accountant. Well, turns out it was something that they shouldn't have invested into, and they were going to be fined, and they had to all go to Sydney and stand in court. And the accountant said to every one of them, they're all in a line, he said, when you go in, talk to the judge, just say this, the charge will be dismissed and you can go home. And I think what they had to say was, I didn't know that this is where my money was going or something. But Dad said, well, that's not true. I did know that you were going to do this. I just didn't realise that it was wrong. But the accountant said, but if you say that, you're going to get fined this, tens of thousands of dollars. Dad's like, well, I can't lie. So every single one of them went in and said, I didn't know. And so their charges were dismissed. And Dad went in and the judge asked him, did you know? And Dad said, yes, I knew. And he was charged tens of thousands of dollars. And he went home without any regret. He didn't have any regret over that because he did the right thing. He had integrity. He told the truth. And yes, it cost him, but he could live with himself. When you make those choices, it builds a life of integrity. It builds your character.
And I think God sees that. As I was reading those verses earlier, I think God blesses those things. When you live a life of integrity, he's going to bless your life. He's going to make your path straight. He's going to, prosper you in a way because you made the right decision, because you lived a life of integrity. I think another thing of integrity as we finish out is, I think, being able to admit that you're wrong. I think that's a thing of integrity. We always talk about doing the right thing. It's all do. Well, sometimes we make the wrong decision. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's by accident. But I think integrity also plays into admitting when we're wrong and saying I did the wrong thing or I said the wrong thing, and being willing to make recompense for that, to repent.
To take the heat, not blame anyone else.
That's right.
Don't say, it was the woman, like Adam did.
Yes. And so it's really just doing the right thing. But at times, I think it's admitting that you did the wrong thing as well, and taking the credit for that, or
taking the consequences.
Consequences, yeah. This has been the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Thanks so much for listening today. If you'd like to support our ministry and you've been blessed by a podcast or one of the books or any of our social pages and would like to financially support the ministry, we now have a Patreon page, and you can look that up, and we would really love the support. You can do a monthly membership, and there you'll get content that is not found anywhere else in our ministry or social pages. So thanks so much for listening, and we just pray you have a blessed day.